Now, I think the most important part of this story is the missile, the blow that it strikes toward the disinformation industry. There's been a lot of reporting about the disinformation industry, and industry is really what it has become. It's a censorship industrialized complex. Back in 2021, Harper's Magazine by Joe Bernstein wrote one of the best stories on how this industry emerged. It was entitled Bad News, Selling the Story of Disinformation. And here's just a small part of what it said, quote, big disinformation, big disinfo, has found the energetic support from the highest echelons of the American political center, which has been warning of an existential content crisis more or less constantly since the 2016 election. To take only the most recent example, in May, Hillary Clinton told the former Tory leader Lord Haig that, quote, there must be a reckoning by the tech companies for the role that they play in undermining the information ecosystem that is absolutely essential for the functioning of any democracy. Somewhat surprisingly, big tech agrees. Compared with other more literally toxic corporate giants, those in the tech industry have been rather quick to concede the role they play in corrupting the allegedly pure stream of American reality. Over 5 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg said it was, quote, a pretty crazy idea that bad content on his website had persuaded enough voters to swing the 2016 election to Donald Trump. Quote, voters make decisions based on their lived experience, Zuckerberg said. There's a profound lack of empathy in asserting that the only reason someone could have voted the way they did is because they saw fake news. A year later, suddenly chastened, he apologized for being glib and pledged to do his part to thwart those who, quote, spread disinformation. That's what I mean. Mark Zuckerberg mocked the idea after the 2016 election that people only voted for Donald Trump because they were deceived by disinformation to do so. A very patronizing and insulting way to talk about the vast majority of voters, that they voted the way you didn't want only because they're too stupid and were deceived. And that's what he essentially said. He said that's a reductive and ridiculous way of looking at it. And the minute there was political pressure put on Facebook to institute anti-disinformation policies, Mark Zuckerberg immediately did that, and Facebook became a vortex of political censorship. Tablet Magazine and Jacob Siegel, who's a friend of the show, he's been on several times, also wrote a great article. We had him on to talk about it at the time. And we've gone through this history many times, a guide to understanding the hoax of the century, 13 ways of looking at disinformation. And it traces the emergence of this disinformation industry, funded in large part by the US government. Quote, since 2016, the federal government has spent billions of dollars on turning the counter-disinformation complex into one of the world's most powerful forces in the modern world, a sprawling leviathan with tentacles reaching into both the public and private sector, which the government uses to direct a, quote, whole-of-society effort that aims to seize total control over the internet and achieve nothing less than the eradication of human error. So you can imagine why people who have acquired that power are so fearful and enraged of the fact that they might have to give that up. Now, let me just show you a little bit about what this industry actually is and how they're reacting today. First of all, here from Business Insider, fact-checkers at Meta call a, quote, emergency meeting after Mark Zuckerberg pulls the plug. There's an emergency meeting because Meta will no longer fund and rely on the pronouncements of truth and falsity from these groups. Quote, Meta's decision impacts the financial sustainability of fact-checking organizations. The International Fact-Checking Network, the IFCN, you'd be forgiven if you didn't know there was such a thing. Imagine proclaiming yourself to be a member of the International Fact-Checking Network. They convened today an emergency meeting, an emergency meeting of its members following Meta's announcement on Tuesday that it will end its third-party fact-checking partnership in the US and replace them with a crowdsourced moderation tool similar to X's Community Notes. In an exclusive interview with Business Insider, IFCN Director Angie Holland confirmed that the meeting scheduled for Wednesday was organized in direct response to Meta's decision. Quote, we hold these meetings monthly, but we called this one specifically because of today's news, she said. How much would you pay to be able to watch the emergency meeting of these fact checkers who today were accused by Mark Zuckerberg, who used to be one of their biggest champions of being fraudulent political actors, told they would no longer get this flow of money, and most importantly of all, would lose the power to dictate on Meta's platforms what can and can't be said. Imagine that's your whole purpose in life. And out of nowhere, with no warning, this announcement comes, this attack on your purpose, your whole life mission, is announced by one of the most powerful people on the internet in technology. I don't blame them for having an emergency meetings. And like I said, the reports I got from inside these organizations, if you're a person with a lot of empathy for them, which I don't have, would make you kind of sad for them. But if you don't have that empathy, if you think they're toxic influences and blights on a free discourse, as I do, you would find them extremely funny. I was actually concerned for myself today that I might have an overload of schadenfreude hearing about all these people and the way in which they're reacting. Now, if you wonder why this IFCN, this network of fact checkers, is so angry about and worried about the announcement that they were being cut off, it's because they get a lot of funding from Meta. Here is their own fundraising page where they say, "We would like to thank all of our funders. All donations greater than £5,000 or pounds received are listed here along with the amount they gave and what it was given for." And then their biggest donors are Google, where they got 285 million euros. They got 285,000 from Google. They got 198,000 euros from Google, and they got close to 300,000 from Facebook, their largest single donor, and that was for third-party fact-checking and programming. And now this is gone in one day. It's just gone. It's not only gone in the sense that they're not getting that money anymore, it's gone in the sense that this, their biggest source of revenue, has said that they're basically a fraudulent service, that they're worthless, and that it's better to rely on the community to assess truth than for them to do. And obviously that's going to put pressure on their Google funding as well. You may remember Nina Yankovic. She was the ludicrous, preposterous cartoon of liberal resistance that the Biden Homeland Security Department tried to install as the disinformation czar inside the Department of Homeland Security. Even for our censorship-happy culture, that was a bridge too far. The controversy was intense. Needless to say, she and her media allies, once the government had to was forced to reverse that decision, accused everybody of disinformation. And then Nina Yankovic went and created her own disinformation project called the American Sunlight Project. And she constantly refers to herself as a disinformation expert. When she goes on CNN or when the New York Times talks about her, she's referred to as a disinformation researcher. She's a joke. She's like if you were put in a room, dropped into a room of Rachel Maddow fans, she would fit in perfectly. She would not be remotely out of place. That's who they wanted to make the disinformation czar. When she didn't get to be that, she founded her own group that's now very well financed. And talk about schadenfreude. Here was her announcement, Nina Yankovic's statement in response to Meta eliminating fact checkers. She put this statement on Blue Sky as well, which is where she, of course, went. Quote, "Let's be clear. The fact checkers have not been politically biased, as Zuckerberg suggests. Perish that thought. Instead, we have been perceived as such because of politically motivated efforts to smear them, one that Zuck is now participating in and capitulating to. Facebook has already contributed to the demise of journalism, and this will be the final nail in the coffin. Newsrooms, especially outside the US, where subscription models are difficult sells, get grants from Facebook to provide fact checks." So in other words, the media outlets that people no longer trust, that people have turned away from, that they no longer subscribe to, have been getting grants from Facebook to tell Facebook what is and isn't true. And Nina Yankovic says, "That money allows them to do other journalism!" Exclamation point. She's really worked up over this. The implications are going to be widespread, she says. Fact-checking was not a panacea to disinformation on Facebook, but it was an important part of moderation. Bumpers are fully off the lane now. Here was CNN in mid-2022 when that whole debacle happened. DHS shuts down disinformation board months after its efforts were paused. Quote, Nina Yankovic. What is her credential? What is her job? She's the disinformation expert, says CNN. Nina Yankovic, the disinformation expert with experience working on Ukraine and Russia issues. I'm sorry for my mockery. She is a disinformation expert. After all, she has experience working on Russia and Ukraine issues. Resigned in May after Homeland Security paused the board. Her appointment had quickly drawn condemnation from Republican lawmakers and right-wing media. Can you believe that? Apparently, only Republican lawmakers and right-wing media object when the Department of Homeland Security, part of the U.S. security state, tries to install, under Joe Biden, a disinformation czar who's a caricature of Democratic Party partisan politics and American liberalism. That's now just right-wing to object to that. Republican lawmakers and right-wing media, said CNN, pointed to her past tweets and statements regarding Hunter Biden's laptop and Christopher Steele, the author of the so-called Steele dossier. Yeah, the disinformation expert was one of the leaders of claiming the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, itself a total lie, and she also promoted the Steele dossier, complete hoax and fraud. Quote, I had hoped we would be more transparent about how the board was going to operate and what it was going to do, she said, acknowledging that the new initiative should have been rolled out differently, as if that was the only problem, that it was just kind of a PR problem in how it was described. And then here was the New York Times in April last year when she formed her new group. Quote, new group joins the political fight over disinformation online. Quote, the group intends to fight what its leader, Nina Yankovic, and others have described as a coordinated campaign by conservatives and their allies to undermine researchers who study disinformation. Quote, she has joined the American Sunlight Project with two veteran political strategists, Mr. Alvarez Arenas, formerly a communication strategist for Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan group that seeks to counter domestic authoritarian threats, and Eddie Vail, formerly of American Bridge, a liberal group devoted to gathering opposition research into Republicans. The organization's advisory board includes Kate Harbath, a former Facebook executive who was previously a top Senate digital strategist for Senate Republicans, and Nick Mushevich, a founder of the Movement Advance Project, a think that tracks threats to democracy and gay, lesbian, and transgender issues, and Benjamin Wittes, a national security legal expert at the Brookings Institute and editor-in-chief of Lawfare. It's been established as a nonprofit, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the kind of people who have been grotesquely empowered, who Mark Zuckerberg not only condemned today, but also threatened their funding, and they are incredibly upset about it, as you might imagine. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.